The Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Israeli health authorities seek to end a program of injecting birth control drugs into unsuspecting immigrants. Tova Feldshuh's cabaret, getting Beyond Bubbe, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. A shocking report of Israeli and nonprofit agencies injecting birth control medication into Ethiopian immigrants without their clear consent or understanding seems to have been validated by an Israeli health official. We at TJC told you of the Israeli television news story in December in which an investigation suggested that clinics for immigrants were giving the injections to Ethiopian immigrants without explaining the nature of the medication or asking for consent. After vigorous denials from government officials and the nonprofit agencies that oversee the clinics, this week the Director General of Israel's Ministry of Health has issued an order to stop injecting the drug, Depo-Provera, without informed consent and, quote, not to renew prescriptions for Depo-Provera for women of Ethiopian origin if, for any reason, there is concern that they might not understand the ramifications of the treatment. Studies have shown an approximately 50% decline in the Ethiopian-Israeli birth rate over the past 10 years. Many activists are pointing to the unofficial policy of injections as a major reason for that decline. The organization that runs the clinic that had been cited in the initial news reports, the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, or JDC, recently denied in an email with failedmessiah.com that it maintained a program of injecting birth control without proper consent. As we go to air, it has not offered further comment. In news of Israel's fiscal health, Bank of Israel Governor Stanley Fischer is ending his second term 2 years early. He announced this week that he'll be stepping down this June. Fischer is serving the second of 2 5-year terms to which he was appointed. His current term hadn't been expected to end until 2015. Fischer is widely credited with having brought significant growth to Israel's economy during his 8 years of service, and particularly during the financial crisis and global downturn of recent years. Under Fischer's leadership, Israel's Knesset passed the Bank of Israel law in 2010 that gave the bank a freer hand in setting monetary policy, while also making the decisions within the bank rely more heavily on a committee than on a single leader. Those reforms made the bank more similar to the Federal Reserve Bank here in the United States. Fischer is stepping down as Israel is facing both political and economic crossroads, with it still unclear what kind of coalition will be created from the recent elections and what fiscal policy it will implement. Lack of certainty about Israel's monetary policy at the same time could lead to some difficult times in the months and years to come. One small potential boon for Israel is both an economic matter and in regard to its status in the world of popular culture. The staging of a Lollapalooza festival in Tel Aviv now seems unlikely to happen. Lollapalooza Israel was announced in August in a video from festival leader and popular musician Perry Farrell, but the planned festival for this summer has now been canceled, according to a report in the Los Angeles Times. But one Jewish cultural figure who is sure to be seen on the stage is Tova Feldshuh, who's starring in a new cabaret, as Meredith Gansman reports.
Whether you catch stage veteran Tova Feldshuh on, off, or below Broadway, you're in for a good show. Her new cabaret premieres next week at Manhattan's 54 Below, and I sat down with her at her home on the Upper West Side to find out what or who audiences can expect to see from this eclectic artist. At home, Tova Feldshuh is set to perform, rehearsing her new cabaret on, off, and now under Broadway. She introduces audiences to a variety of characters, ages 8 to 88, comic and dramatic, most of whom sing and whose stories examine the meaning of life.
What does it mean to come from a cultural Jewish father and a non-practicing Catholic mother? What does it mean to come from Russia to the Bronx and dream of being an actor and instead become a housewife? What does it mean to be a New York City street kid who ain't got nothing but still celebrates the vivid energies of New York to help him write songs? What does it mean to be passionately in love and at my age?
Now in her 40th New York theater season, Feldshuh has learned that tapping into the universal themes of all these stories is the key to a successful performance.
I once played Hong Kong, and I did Grandma Ada, and afterwards they came up to me and said, "Oh, we love Grandma Ada, so Chinese. Honor, family, journey." This is wild. I love Grandma Ada, so Chinese.
Grandma Ada is just one of the characters in Feldshuh's repertoire. Since making her debut in 1973, she's played everyone from Yentl to Golda Meir.
If you're going to be, to a certain degree, typecast as Jewish, I say, don't be a local Jew, be a global Jew. Saravah, Saravah, Saravah means hello stranger, ciao shalom.
For her new show, this global Jew is going underground at Manhattan's 54 Below, the club beneath the famous nightclub turned Broadway theater, Studio 54, which plays host to elite entertainers. Feldshuh's memories of the nightclub served as inspiration for her new cabaret.
And when I came to Studio 54, I was dancing on the tables one story up, and it was the beautiful people, and it was the roaring 70s. And we look at the street characters of that time who were with us, both in the subways and the socialites.
To hear more from Feldshuh on what it takes to perform cabaret, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Christian Needham reports on culinary efforts that go beyond Bubbe.
The best recipes of Jewish grandmothers and fathers were the talk of the evening at 92Y Tribeca recently for the debut of a new storytelling series called Beyond Bubbe. The series was co-created by David Sachs, the author of Save the Deli, who served as MC for the night.
Beyond Bubbe is something that myself and a bunch of other people came up with a number of years ago, because we all realized that every family, everyone we knew had a grandmother, and every grandmother had a recipe, and every recipe had a story behind it.
Sachs opened with a story about his French-Canadian maternal grandmother.
She would, like most good Jewish grandmothers in Montreal, never leave a mint at the end of a meal on the table. Often, someone would bring the check for 4 people, and there would be 4 or 5 mints. Those mints would go into her purse, and if there happened to be a bowl of mints by the cash, so be it. Those were casualties as well. And over time, she accumulated a stockpile until she had a sizable quantity of after-dinner peppermints, which she would then put in a plastic bag and smash with a rolling pin. And then she would take a tub of ice cream that she bought, also probably at half price, let it melt a bit and stir in the peppermints until the colors started oozing and the ice cream swirled. And it was her famous peppermint ice cream. And it was one of the best things ever.
The event was presented at 92Y Tribeca through Reboot, which TJC viewers may recall organizes the annual National Day of Unplugging. Reboot National Marketing and Outreach Coordinator Dina Mann talked about how Beyond Bubbe became a reality.
So David Sachs, along with other people, came up with this idea. And what Reboot does is we help take those ideas and kind of bring them out to the broader Jewish world. So it was a storytelling event. We had Carla Hall, Mo Rocca, Jake Dowell from Katz's Deli, 5th generation owner. We had Joan Nathan, and we also had Judy Battalion, who's an actor and writer, and John Donahue, who's a writer for The New Yorker, also writes a blog, Man with a Pan.
Mo Rocca hosts a cooking channel show called My Grandmother's Ravioli, where he learns to cook from other people's grandparents. But on this night, he recalled the ravioli cooked by his own grandmother.
In the last few years, I have thought a lot about my grandmother's ravioli. Literally, is she up there? There she is. It was so great, and I was just thinking that she'd be 107 right now. She was very strong, and but I thought in her ravioli it was very simple. It was she handmade the pasta, and then it was just ground beef, spinach, and garlic, and a very light tomato sauce. And the envelopes of pasta were very big and kind of delicate, so you wouldn't just woof them down. They were kind of delicate almost. And even though they were very simple, they were very special. Every time it felt very special.
For more from Beyond Bubbe at 92Y Tribeca, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Finally this week, a startling investigation into ultra-Orthodox schools in Brooklyn has found that tens of thousands of students receive almost no education in core subjects of English, math, and science. The situation is so bad that many men feel they reach the age of 18 with essentially no skills to join the job market and knowing so little of the English language that they need to take English as a second language courses if they want to get a job. Sonia Sharp of DNAinfo.com is the reporter-producer behind the investigation. She stopped by this week for an interview, and here are the highlights. So let's start with, what were some of the most surprising things that you found in this Brooklyn Yeshiva system?
I think probably the single most surprising thing when we began our investigation is just how very big the system is. A lot of the things that we uncovered are things that are well known in the community. Many people, you know, if you yourself were educated in that system, or you know people who are educated in that system, some of the things we uncovered about secular education would not be surprising, but I think what surprised everybody, even people very close to the system, was just how many kids there are. We're talking about a system that's larger than the Boston public school system, 84,000 kids as compared to only 300,000 kids in the entire Brooklyn public school system. So it's very, very large.
And these 84,000 students, what you find is that many of them in these schools are, other than a few years, at least for the boys, not learning any English, not learning any math, not learning any science.
That's exactly right. Many of the largest schools in Brooklyn, largest and most prominent yeshivas, are instructing either an hour or two a day in English, math, science, and history for boys between 4th and 8th grade, or in other cases there were schools that we found that don't teach it at all. We're talking from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. And that's a trend that experts say is actually growing. There are more and more schools that are doing less and less of that type of instruction that's mandated by New York State law.
So you have a system where the best case is that students receive 4 years of an hour to a day of instruction in what you might call general interest or secular subjects, and that's the best case.
There certainly are schools, there certainly are Orthodox schools in Brooklyn that follow the letter of the law, that do provide, but in general for boys, many of the very largest schools, an increasing number of schools, experts tell us, are providing exactly that. The best case is an hour or two for several grades, and the worst case is none at all. And
that's actually, I want to get into that because I think you used the word Orthodox throughout the article, but something that there is this, what I believe is a strong dividing line between the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, and that we have schools that we know of that are Orthodox schools like the Yeshiva of Flatbush that produce many Ivy League students every year, but that's a minority in Brooklyn, certainly at this point. But throughout your article, you use terms like majority, most, things like that. So what sense of proportion is there? There are 84,000 students in Jewish parochial schools. How many of them are in this type of situation of less than adequate or less than keeping with the legal requirements, secular education?
Well, I would start by saying it's difficult to know exactly because the records that we would go by to know that are either non-existent or very hard to find. And certainly that's something we're working as we continue our investigation to nail down exactly how many of these students. What we do know is, as you said exactly, there's a term that the Jewish papers use and the Israeli papers use, Haredi, which would be much more accurate to what we're talking about, really talking about Haredi schools, not Orthodox as sort of the much larger umbrella that you mentioned. That's not a term that's familiar to most secular readers in New York,
right,
which is our audience.
Right.
And so we decided, we made an editorial decision not to use that term. But the recent UJ...
Which I agree with. We don't use the term here. I feel like asking an audience to know what an Israeli audience or an Orthodox audience would understand in terminology is asking too much.
Right, but I certainly agree with you, and that's something that some readers did bring to our attention. They said, wait.
But a broad sense of proportion, because you do use terms like majority.
Right.
You know, so we know, I mean, Yeshiva Flatbush has at most a couple thousand students, probably fewer. But are there a significant number of additional modern Orthodox schools, or are we really talking about, when you're talking about this kind of standard, are you talking about 15,000 kids out of the 84,000? Are you talking about 40,000? Are you talking about 60,000?
I mean, United Talmudical Academy has, you're getting up to almost 15,000 kids, and that's just one school, and that's one of the schools that we name as having a couple of years of instruction. So it's definitely much more than 15,000. It's a very large number. What the UJA study that I'm sure you're familiar with showed when it
this would be the study that just came out in the past couple of months about population, about the demographics of the Jewish community in the New York area, and it showed some significant growth for the ultra-Orthodox.
Right, and particularly in Brooklyn, in their numbers in Brooklyn, they've shown that the ultra-Orthodox community has grown a great deal. It's by far the largest and the largest growing community. Almost universally, that community sends their kids to schools that reflect those values. And what experts tell us is, again, more and more of these schools are exactly the model that we've described. So again, it's difficult to say precisely how many of these students would fall into that camp, but it's easy to say that it is a majority.
You can see the full interview with Sonia Sharp under the Weekly News category on the Jewish Channel On Demand on cable. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 291, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and now on Comcast Cable in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.